and welcome to The Extra Mile. I'm Linda Boudreau. Today we're going to be talking about the Southern Eye Bank, and to tell us about it are Joy Fragola, who is the Professional Outreach Director, and Tommy Duhon, who is a volunteer. Welcome, Joy and Tommy. So glad y'all could make it today.
Thank you.
You were on about a year and a half ago, Joy, and we talked about Southern Eye Bank, but I'm not sure that people remember, or maybe they missed the show. So just kind of by way of review, what is Southern Eye Bank?
We're a nonprofit organization. We're one of 3 eye banks in the state. And our mission is actually to restore and improve sight through cornea transplant. The way we do that is we recover the tissue, we evaluate the tissue, and then we send it on to the surgeons. So in Southwest Louisiana right now, there is no waiting list if you need to have a cornea transplant.
That says volumes, or speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Amazing, amazing. In most areas, there's a waiting list.
So you're doing something right.
We're doing a lot right. And the only reason we're doing a lot right is that we have so many families who are saying yes. Because we can't do our job without the community doing theirs and sharing the corneas and the gift of sight.
So when we're talking about cornea transplant, what are we talking about?
The cornea is the very first tissue covering your eye. It's clear, it looks like a contact lens, and it's about the size of a contact lens. So when you have a diseased cornea, it's very painful. Do you ever get anything in your eye?
Yeah, it hurts.
If you scratch your cornea, it's very painful. So the diseases are painful. Most of them are progressive. So it may start out mild, but over time, they find that they may need a transplant.
And if a transplant happens, then what happens to the person that got the transplant? What happens to the person that gets the transplant?
Well, actually, the transplant's a pretty simple operation now. It's an outpatient. It's about a 25-minute operation. And
You're kidding.
When they come out from the surgery, they actually can see. Now, their vision will improve over time, but they can see. We've had patients tell us that they didn't even realize how bad their sight was because it's such a gradual loss, and they adapt to that loss.
Right.
So when they have the surgery, it's like walking into the sunshine. And even though it's not as clear as it will be, it's a total revelation. It's totally changing their lives. And we've been doing this now for 65 years. I had no
idea. I had no idea that we've been doing cornea transplants for 65 years, much less that you had been around that long,
well,
your
we've
agency.
been in existence for 65 years. Cornea transplants are over 100 years old.
So there's nothing new to this.
There's a lot new.
Aha. Is it changing?
A lot of things that change are the techniques and the instrumentation, the way they can actually do the transplants, all change. What doesn't change is the need for us to have the communities educated and to have them be willing to share.
Because there's no substitute for a cornea, right?
There is no substitute. There's nothing we can use for a cornea transplant except a human cornea tissue.
And cornea transplants fall within that whole spectrum of organ donation, but
Correct.
There's something special or different about the cornea?
Cornea is tissue, although it's still living tissue, so it has to be used in this country within 14 days. So it's still living, but once you have that heart on your license, basically what you're saying is yes to organ, tissue, that LOPA recovers, and corneas.
Okay. And a lot of times, if I remember correctly, corneas can be used when maybe no other organs can. Corneas can be used when no other organs can, is that right? Sometimes?
Corneas can actually be used for research.
Okay.
And they can, if they can't be used in our country, usually we have a home for them within 3 days, so we know where they're going. And that's one of the missions of an eye bank system. We share tissue.
Okay.
Right? So if someone needs an emergency transplant in another state and they don't have the tissue available, we'll ship it there.
Okay.
If we can't use it within that 14 days, though, we do send it to other countries.
Okay, so it's not being wasted.
I'm sorry.
It's not being wasted.
Oh, we'd never waste it. No, it's such a gift.
It's too
we
precious.
never waste
It's
it.
too
Yes,
precious.
Absolutely.
So tell me, how did you get involved with Southern Eye Bank?
Well, I guess maybe a couple years ago, about this time, Joy in the Southern Eye Bank was going to do an in-service education. I work at Heart Hospital, and I'm in human resources, but I had somewhat of a professional interest and a personal interest in going hear more about the Southern Eye Bank and tissue donation. So I attended her session and learned a lot. And one of the, I think the most important things that I learned there is that eye tissue can be donated even though a patient has had cancer, as long as it wasn't cancer of the eye. And that kind of tied into the personal aspect that I had, because my wife and I had one child, and he had cancer. He had a melanoma, and during the course of his treatment, we were told that he would not be able to donate his organs. So we took that carte blanche, as he was not going to be able to fulfill his request that he be an organ donor, as he has the heart on his license that Joy mentioned a bit ago. And with that revelation from her, I felt somewhat compelled to share my story with her, and a willingness to go out and tell others who may be in our situation, who may have a family member with cancer, yet that person is identified as an organ and tissue donor, then that person would be in a position to help their loved one fulfill a wish, as one of the last things they do before leaving this earth. So in some ways, it's therapeutic for my wife and I to be able to help get this message across.
And it is an important message. And corneas can be donated, like I said earlier, even when other organs can't be used. Is that right? I mean, like, I remember a friend of mine who was in her 60s wanted to be an organ donor, but when she died, the only thing that they could use was her cornea.
For organ donation, there really is not an age limit. It's taken on a case-by-case basis. And the organs that they recover are heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, pancreas, and small intestine. So those are life-saving. And you have to die in a particular way in order to be an organ donor.
Okay.
Only about 3% of the population will die that way.
So
there's a long waiting list for life-saving organs. However, there's different criteria for tissue and corneas. So we do have an age limit, which is 75, but you can have cancer and still be a cornea donor. So that gives us a much broader base of people to draw from.
Okay.
You don't have to be on a respirator. You can die at home. You can die in hospice. You can die in a car accident on the road. And we're actually working with coroners and sheriff's departments and state police. We're working with funeral homes so that all of these people that do die are called in and their families are given this option. Right? Because it really, the criteria are so different.
Okay.
We go by case basis.
And I do think we get it confused. I think we just don't really understand some of the specifics about these sorts of donations.
No, it's a challenge sometimes to understand, and the criteria change on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
So part of our job is to actually help educate people so that they know before anything happens what they would like to do.
And I guess this is a good time to make a plug for the heart on your driver's license.
That's right.
Because to be an organ donor is, I think, a very big deal. And it's something that, it's an easy enough thing for us to do, don't you think? I mean,
it's the individual's way of communicating to people when they can't, that's their desire.
Yeah.
And I think it's incumbent upon us as parents of our children, or as siblings of our brothers and sisters, that we help them have that fulfilled, have that carried out on their behalf if they can't. In our case, when our son was sick and dying, we discussed that option that he had, and pretty much came to the realization early on, errantly, that he would not be able to donate his cornea, because we thought it was just lumped in there with all the other organs, so to speak. And so if everyone can be cognizant of what other family members of theirs may have, and or friends, I mean, there's a lot of young people out there that, they share everything else on Facebook, so why not share that you have a heart on your driver's license? It's a good way to get a conversation started, if nothing else.
Well, I was just going to say, Facebook just announced today that they're going to start putting that as one of your identifiers. Are you an organ donor?
Oh, how wonderful.
It is.
It is, because, you know, it's something I remember years ago, it was very difficult to talk about.
Yes.
Now, I think we talk about organ donation pretty easily. We might not have the courage to say, I really want to do it, or I don't want to do it, but the conversation is being had, and the more people talk about it, the more accepted it becomes and the easier it is to do it.
And I think too, you know, the media is helping so much. The movies, the stories, they're covering families now whose children are donors. It touches your heart, and it helps. But there are still people who feel that to talk about organ donation is almost like saying they're going to die very soon.
Right.
And the reality is most of us don't die young.
Yeah.
Most of us are too old to be organ donors when we die. And so it's just having that conversation. Because you can be a donor even if you don't have the heart on your license.
But then you have to have the conversation.
You have to have had that conversation,
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now you have with you today a quilt, speaking of family members and the gift that people give. And you take this quilt or this or other quilts around as a part of your story, am I right?
That's right, of what we do and the people that we help. Because what we have found is that donation is healing for the families of the donors, as well as it's giving sight and healing to the people who are the recipients. So two of these two young boys were also organ donors. But the families each make a square, and they have the option of doing it or not. Some of them do the square 3 or 4 years after the death. Some of it do within 3 weeks we have the square. So there's no time limit. It's whatever they feel comfortable, and for each family, each square tells a story. When we get enough, we put them together in a quilt, and we show them everywhere we go.
Okay, so who are these two young men?
This young man was actually a donor about 15 years ago. His mom now works for LOPA. See, Tommy, you may have another career coming.
That's what I need. That's what I need at this point. in my
Because you
life,
don't have
another
enough to
career.
do.
Yes.
But he saved 5 lives when he died, and he gave sight to 2 people.
Wow, wow.
Amazing. This young man also saved lives. This young man, his grandmother made the quilt square, and she sent it in to us. This young girl was a Down syndrome child and gave sight to 2 people. So there's a lot of different stories here. You know, the grandchildren did this one for their grandmother.
Oh, it's just wonderful. It's such
And
a
when
happy
people
one.
do the quilt square, they actually are given the opportunity to write a little bit about their loved one. And when we show this quilt, and I didn't bring it, when we show the quilt square, we actually have the book of the stories
Okay.
in it so that people can read about each square.
Okay, and these are the donors.
These are the donors.
Do the donors ever get to meet the people, the recipient? I mean, the donor
Oh,
families ever get to meet
Sometimes
the?
they do. It has to be mutual. They have to both want it. Last year at our, actually March 17th, at our picnic in Audubon Zoo in New Orleans, 2 families met their recipients. One was their son had died almost 15 years ago.
Wow.
He was 13 when he died, and they had never even wanted to talk about it. Okay? Now, she suddenly decided she would like to meet the donor. And I say suddenly, but she'd thought about it for a long time. She really wanted to meet the recipient. And they talked a few years back, and then Katrina came along, and they kind of lost touch, and they let things drop. Well, we found her. We found the recipient, and they met at our picnic. And the donor's whole family was there, cousins and brothers. And, I mean, there were tears, and there was a real peace that you could see it. It was wonderful. And the second family that met was a young mother who lost her 2-year-old son here in Lafayette about 3 years ago.
She was on with you the last time
Yes,
you were
Reese
here.
Bourget, yes.
Right.
And she actually met her son's recipient. He had said he would be late, so there was a real drama about this one. He had said he would be late to the picnic. It was 20 minutes till the end of the picnic, and he still wasn't there. And Reese said she understood, and something must have happened, and she left. And guess what happened? 5 minutes later, who walks in?
Yeah.
Okay, but Joseph. So I immediately called Reese, and 5 minutes later, she's running back into the zoo and into our area, and she ran to him and hugged him and didn't let him go. I mean, she was crying on his shoulder. She just was overwhelmed. But Joseph could see, he could see his grandchildren, and he's a kind, caring person. I mean, he held her, and they cried together. It was wonderful.
And that's what the healing's all about. And a part of her son lives on
That's right.
in Joseph.
The thing is, too, some families get thank you notes from the recipients, and some never do. So we've also done what we call our gratitude quilts. And we've taken copies of the thank you notes, and we've made them into quilt squares. And we show them as well as the donor quilts, so that people can see what it means.
So who does the quilting? I mean, do you have do you do
I
these?
do.
Were you a
I'm
quilter
sorry.
before?
Occasionally.
Is this a way?
Not very often. Now I seem to be one.
But is this something that you started doing on your own because it seemed like a good way to communicate, or is this a national?
Actually, we took a best practice.
Okay.
And we shared Lopa's idea, and Lopa got their idea from another iBank and another donation organization. So I think a lot of organizations now are doing these quilts.
And they are very powerful.
They are. I do want to say that Tommy's role here, while he misses this opportunity.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, Tommy, actually.
It is just so amazing for someone to hear firsthand what it means when they don't know. So we do a lot of workshops for professionals, and when they don't know that it's easy to donate corneas, and when they don't realize that all they have to do is make one phone call, he lets them see the impact of not knowing. And I think that's really powerful.
It's very heartwarming and touching to see these and hear these types of stories. And yes, we very much would have liked to have been able to share in that, not from a selfish sense, but from a sense knowing that Blaine, our son, his wish would have been fulfilled.
Yeah.
The one up at the top said life is a dream, and it has a heart with the lady's eyes and mouth and curly hair in there. That is those individuals' dreams, that these things take place. And if we don't ask family members and don't talk about it, even though, let's say, I personally have an objection to this, that's not my decision. It's that person's decision to have this done. And I think it's incumbent upon us, again, to help them fulfill that.
In any way that we can. But the first step is knowledge.
Right,
the first step is knowledge.
You have to know.
And I honestly think that there's more awareness about organ donation than cornea donation, although apparently cornea donation is really having some great success. Think about what we could do if we could even take it farther.
I know.
Think about it.
It's amazing. Last year, just in Southwest Louisiana, we had over 700 donor families that said yes to cornea donation. It's just an amazing population here.
Well, but I think people are pretty amazing everywhere. I think a lot of it is just giving people the opportunity and letting them know so how would you do it? If you wanted to be a cornea donor, how would you do it?
You put the heart on your license.
But if you didn't?
You have to talk to your family because they're the ones that are going to be asked.
So, but it has to be,
we have to ask permission from the next of kin.
Okay. Do you make a contact when someone dies?
Actually, what happens, especially if they die at home, then the coroner or the nurse would call us. So we don't necessarily call them until after the fact. So we've been called, we've been notified of the death, and then we do call and ask for permission. We ask for consent, and we do a medical social history. We want to ensure that the tissue is very healthy and that there's no communicable disease that will be transferred from the cornea to the recipient. Okay, so we do talk to families.
So I guess for me, the process would be for people that have not self-identified as organ donors, but you've been contacted, so you would contact that family. So would you then be the one to start to inform them about the possibility, or has the coroner already done that?
I don't do that as much from my office, although I have done it. I do it more in person. When someone wants to talk to somebody, a representative of the iBank in person. But we do have specially trained technicians and personnel that make those phone calls. Because it's coming at a very trying time for
That's
someone.
that's what I'm thinking. This would not be an easy call to make.
No, and it's not. And what we find is that if we can give them a little bit of time, once they're starting to process the fact that their loved one has died, once they've started to call a funeral home and they've started to call relatives, then they can actually start thinking a little bit about, well, what are the next steps? If we ask too soon,
They can't
people are
talk to
say
you.
no because they're still saying no to the death.
Right, exactly,
know.
exactly.
But as long as they tell us we can call back, we'll call back. We actually have to recover within 12 hours.
That was my next question. So you know, there's not a lot of
There's a
time.
very limited time frame. In fact, Reese mentioned that when she was
She
on the
did.
program before, that she was offended that we had called because she had just lost her son. And she was not sure she could give anything else, even though she was a registered donor.
Yeah,
So it isn't so much as someone saying no to donation. They're saying no to the death.
exactly,
And
exactly.
what we've learned is that giving them a little bit of time, offering to call them back, seeing what we can do to help. You know, Lopez sends people, when someone's an organ donor, to be with the family the whole time. I mean, they need support. And we realize that our families need support as well.
Because it's really very similar, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Joy's efforts through the Southern Eye Bank is one of the, I guess, avenues that they're taking is, and they've asked me to help them with, was to help inform the nurses, the hospice staffs, as to when is that correct time. And, you know, it's hard to just put it down in black and white. It's that nurse who's sitting with that patient, or the hospice representative who may be calling on that patient, their social worker. When they see the avenue, you know, it's easy for them to say at that point in time, you know, we've noticed that your loved one isn't identified as an organ donor. You know, their eye tissue is also available when it's appropriate. You know,
Right.
like Joy said, sometimes too soon is not the right time because they're focusing on living and dying.
Right.
And not what takes place thereafter. But it's they'll know. You know, I think those people who work as professionals in those venues, they've been around long enough to sense when the family would be receptive to talking about it, and or at least they planted that seed for a little bit further down the road.
Right, right. And I think one of the big things for that is for the family themselves, once they make that decision, there is some peace in that. You know, there really is some peace.
Absolutely. To know that they've done something positive on a day when nothing else seems to be happening.
Right, right.
Positive.
And I think that's what this quilt is all about. This quilt is really about hope. So without a cornea, just so that we can kind of bring this back, without a cornea, without transplants, what happens to the recipients?
Well, they're blind, usually. You know, the disease progresses to blindness, or at least legal blindness. If your cornea is perforated, it's actually life-threatening because the cornea is the only tissue that protects your optic nerve in your brain from bacteria and viruses.
Ooh, that's kind of a biggie.
It's a little piece of cornea that's 5 layers of cells thick. If that's perforated, then you will have a cornea transplant if it does not start to heal within 24 hours. So that is life-saving at that point. And that's actually partly where eye banks started. You know, hospitals would bank tissue.
So that they would have it when they needed it.
So they would have them for emergency.
Okay. And are the banks worldwide? The eye
Yes,
banks
actually,
are
there
worldwide?
are eye banks worldwide. There's an eye bank association here in the United States, but there are eye banks all over the country. I think there's 122 eye banks in this country that are registered as an eye bank associate.
And can we brag about us for a minute here? How are we ranking?
Oh, we are in the top 20 of this country. Isn't it? I'm just so thrilled we just found this out.
So
yeah.
Congratulations on all of
Thank you.
that. And once again, I guess kind of to just wrap up today, we encourage people to become organ donors. You can do that when you go to the DMV to get your driver's license. There's a question on there saying, would you like to be an organ donor? If you say yes, you get a heart, right? If you haven't done that, have the discussion with your family members. Is that a fair thing to say?
Exactly.
And it just makes a lot of difference. Thank you both for being here with us
Thank you very
today
much.
and for
much.
sharing this, and thank you for watching The Extra Mile.
That's amazing. You just keep, like it just flew by. And other than my